Hi everyone. I'm going to walk you through an activity that we would have done in class together. It would have been fun to have some Clementines in class, but since we can't do that, I like to do this activity because it really helps beginning level pattern making students kind of understand spatial awareness and the relationship between three-dimensional objects and the pattern making process, which we do need to have knowledge of in product development. So I have a few activities that I'm going to do all together, and I'll let you know when you need to follow along for the online activity submission for this week. So the goal that we're going to work on here is to really understand how to get flat things like paper or fabric to conform to three-dimensional objects. So in this case, we're going to work with Clementines. I'll bring out some balls in a few minutes and, really understand how we make 2D things shape around three-dimensional objects. So what I've done here to prep is I've drawn some lines on some Clementines. So we can see what actually needs to happen when we want to flatten the skin out. So the objective of this activity is to make a perfectly flat skin that's been wrapped around the three-dimensional object. And so this one's a spiral, this one's kind of some straight lines, and then this one's kind of a star-shaped pattern, a 4-point star. So I finished cutting the peel off, and these are the shapes that result from me cutting on those basically 4-point star lines. And what we usually do with young students is we usually have them look at the shape that we've drawn on this three-dimensional object and choose from a series of other shapes what those might look like in the flattened form. This is from a summer program for 11 to 13-year-old girls, and it's really aimed at trying to help with spatial manipulation. And as you know, spatial manipulation is pattern making, and pattern making is spatial manipulation. So when you looked at that Clementine before I cut the peel off, would you have been able to see the shape that this would be flattened? Now, the reason that I'm able to flatten it is because we cut really big or took away really big inserts at at each point on this drawing, lines that go along each edge. And so I think this one will be fairly clear and really kind of drive the point home for the utility, the usefulness, why we have to have darts. I did sanitize these scissors if you're curious. Okay. So here, it's nice and fitted around, and this is essentially what we see when we make darts for pattern pieces. So if I peel this one off, I didn't cut the second one just yet. Pop the top of this off. So when we lay it out flat, in order to lay out flat, it has to have those cuts into it. So we have little tiny darts right here that form. I'm going to peel this off without cutting it. This will be like as if the darts are sewn up. Okay. And so if I were to take this guy and if I were to try to make it flat, obviously that can't happen because it's a cylindrical shape or spherical shape, sorry. But as soon as I cut into it, now I can start to lay it out flat. And so I could have lots of little cuts like this to start, or I could have large cuts like I have here. And essentially if it still curls, it needs another dart. So the more cuts you can distribute it around, the flatter it will start to look, or the flatter it will start to lay. So those, my friends are darts. Okay, so now let's look at the spiral one. And so on the spiral one, what do you think? Do you think we will need to add extra little darts or snips into it to get it to lay flat, or will it lay flat when it's cut into a spiral? Let's find out. This one's harder to cut, I will tell you that much. Okay, so now I'm going to peel this off of here, and in one continuous motion, get the peel off of the clementine. Maybe it's better that we didn't do this in class, it's kind of messy. But we could have had snacks. Okay, so now when I peel this off of here, I am actually able to lay it out flat. And the reason for that is because, again, we have kind of these triangle shaped pieces, and this would be called a contour line. So we're able to basically ease this together in pattern making terms in order to be able to fit it back into the cylindrical shape. So you have darts, darts are the most simple way to fit a pattern around a human body, but there is other strategies like the spiral that we see here, or if we look at this guy, which was the 4-pointed star that I cut off. Essentially this is like a halfway in between legitimate darts and contours in our design process. So here's our little darts, kind of darts and contour combination, and then this would be a contouring method. So in this last shape, the spiral here, it's a contour, so it doesn't necessarily need darts, but we're able to ease it all together, sew it all together, ease these pieces back into a three-dimensional shape. So I wanted to show you just other places that we see this happening in real life, and it also happens with baseballs. So here, the same kind of concept applies, where we have essentially two pattern pieces. So one pattern piece here, second one that joins in, that they don't need darts necessarily, but because of the shape of the patterns, we're able to contour it together and make a three-dimensional shape. So when these are peeled off of the baseball, like unstitched, if you lay them out flat, they don't need any darts or any like triangle shaped wedges to help conform them because of the shape that they are. And when we sew them back together, like here's our seam allowance here, when we sew it back together, it makes a shape that fits perfectly over the baseball. So another way to look at it, and I didn't take this one apart for us, is you can further break down those individual shapes in order to conform to a circular shape. And that's what we see here. Soccer balls and volleyballs are the same too. But, so you can kind of see how certain shapes would fit together. And so why is all of this important? Well, it's important in your bag design. You don't necessarily always have to have straight lines. If you can get them to contour together, you can have unique style lines that kind of create curved shapes, but they don't necessarily need to have a dart. You can move beyond darts fairly quickly by exploring other shapes. And so I encourage you to explore other shapes in your final project in your bag design, because it only helps with the spatial manipulation, the two-dimensional to three-dimensional relationship. At the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve is we're trying to achieve 2D flat pattern pieces that we can manipulate into fit around a three-dimensional object. And we need these flat pattern pieces because the substrates that we work with, fabric, comes to us in a two-dimensional form. All right, so I wanted to take the dart discussion just a little bit further and show how it applies to garments. So a little bit less abstracted. I'm talking about fruit, and actually put it towards garment shapes. So what you see here is a single dart, basic front bodice block, or a two dart block, where half of this dart has literally been split into two and distributed from the center waist over to the side seam. And so it's all the same size of shaping. The dart intake is what it's called, is all the same. Like if we measured this distance or measured this and added this to it, it would all be the same size, because we're not altering the fit, but we are just help distribute the dart around the body. So we have patterns that look like this, and particularly in the single dart block, it looks like it ends up looking like this. So once we sew it together, we have the side seam here, side of the garment, and then you can see, here's the single dart for our symmetrical garment. Now, darts can be moved around the body form. They don't have to always just be at the waistline like that. They can be moved and manipulated around in order to create different effects and style lines. So you might have already been doing this, of course, in the designs that you've been drawing, making cats for, like there's darts and whatnot. But I just want to reiterate the point that darts can be moved around the body to help create the shaping that we see here. So V shape there. This one I don't think I'm going to put it on, but you can get the point. Starts to cup around the body. This one intersects with each other. And then you get into garments that start to look like this. So we don't have darts anymore, but we have a big old contour line. So just like we saw the difference between like the spiral and the other Clementine peels that kind of have like a dart shape, now we can kind of incorporate this into one smooth line. And this is contours. Princess seams are the perfect example of contours as they relate to on-body garments. Excuse me. So this guy right here has two darts that kind of go from the neck and two darts that come from the waist, and they are separate dart. They don't connect, but you could easily see how we could create a contour and ease those together in order to create shaping around the bust line. So the other thing that I should say is that darts always happen around curvy parts of the body. So women typically will have more darts on their garments than men, but there are darts in men's garments for sure. It happens around the bust or chest and how we narrow into a more narrow waistline. It also happens around our front abdomens and our back above our butts. And it also happens around the curvature of our shoulder blades. So both menswear and women's wear, you'll see back darts to kind of help create some shaping for the shoulder blades. Okay, so I just want to reiterate, that the purpose of this activity is to understand the many ways we can make two-dimensional materials conform into a three-dimensional shape. We've looked at darts and we've looked at contours. Now, what I would like for us to do is to go ahead and practice this. So this is the activity that you will take a picture of and submit on Canvas. And what you'll need to do for this activity, or the supplies that you'll need for this activity, is some tape. So I've got that here, scissors and a pen or something. You might need a ruler, we'll see. You need that styrofoam ball, or half of the styrofoam ball that I gave to you before we left for spring break. I don't have that. I gave them all out, so I'm going to use this miniature soccer ball to do my activity. And then the other thing that we'll need is, well, I think we should use tissue paper. So I gave you tissue paper in your kit. Certainly you can do this in computer paper too, but tissue paper is easiest to start with, like your first iteration of patterns. So what we're going to do, our objective is to go now from a two-dimensional shape like we have with this paper and make it fit around the three-dimensional object. And so what we will see is that we'll start we will need to create a series of darts or whatnot to be able to start shaping this paper around the ball. And so essentially we're going to create a paper pattern that will fit around this ball as the best we can. And you'll take a picture of the final paper pattern. But to do so, we're going to start creating a series of darts. You can start to see them form right there that fit the ball. All right, so before we get too far into that, I do want to show you one thing that will help with this activity, and that's how to fold a dart. So I'm going to put this off to the side for 1 second. Okay, so this is where you will participate in the activity, but I'm going to show you one thing before we get started on making a paper pattern that fits around a ball shape. So the one thing that you need to know when you're working with darts is how to fold them. So you don't need to do this, you just need to watch, but you're certainly welcome to. So a dart has a dart point, so you can see my red thing here, and then there's a dart intake. So I'm going to do a 2-inch dart. So this would be 1 inch on either side of this line, of course. I'm going to just connect all the dots. So I have a 2-inch dart, and 2 inches means the width of it at the bottom. Okay, and so in order to do this activity, we're going to need to know how to fold darts. So, or refresh on how to fold darts. So when you do this, basically you create a crease at that center line, and that becomes like your middle fold line. So what I like to do is I like to take my paper and I like to have one dart leg, and I make a crease right on that dart leg, because we're trying to shape this into a three-dimensional object, right? The paper's going to start to curve. And I take the folded dart leg and I line it up to the other dart leg that I've drawn. And I press that fold in there. There we go. I press this fold in here, and so when I undo it, I see that this, that this kind of center point of my dart leg here has also been folded. So I can fold it to close it, and it shapes the paper into a curved shape. When I unfold it, it lays it nice and flat, right? I could also cut this out of here, and it would lay flat, just like we saw on the Clementines. Okay, so one more time to fold a dart. Essentially, we just need to take one of the existing dart legs and fold it so it touches the other. That's it. So here we go. I have another one that I just kind of drafted really quickly. I'm going to crease my paper. Along one of the dart legs. It really doesn't matter for this exercise. And I'm going to fold it over until it meets my second dart leg and give it a nice crease. So that's all you need to know to fold a dart. Okay. So now this is where we're going to start working on the activity together. The objective of this activity that you will turn in is to create a pattern piece that fits around the, in my case, the soccer ball. In your case, it'll be the foam balls that I gave you, that I sent you home with. So we're going to make the paper pattern here. We're going to finish up the paper pattern. You're going to take a picture of it, and that's what you'll submit for your assignment. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually just going to kind of play with it a little bit and try to drape it together. You have pins and a styrofoam ball, so you can pin it directly into it. I have tape, so if you don't have pins, you can use tape. And so I'm just going to anchor at one point. But essentially, I'm going to start by working with my paper. I'm going to fold out what looks like a dart leg there. I'm going to fold it over and close it off, making sure I don't get any like extra folds or anything, and close it off until I get what looks like a dart. So you can see it through the tissue paper there. So I'm going to do this a few times, and I'll undo the tape here in a minute so I can get that one. Tape that together so I can hold it. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to keep doing that all the way around this ball until I'm able to get this piece of paper to fit ball shape. And so if you have any luck, or maybe a few trial and errors, you'll start to see some repetition and pattern happening. Keep my ball tight. I'm going to grab essentially what would be one dart leg, grab it, fold it over, get a nice crease. And so the objective is to make sure not all of this, like this isn't gapping or anything at the base of it too. So if that happens, it's just like when we did the half scale dress forms. You might have to roll that dart leg in order to kind of take up all of this excess that you might see at the bottom here. And so you'll want to do this for about what we call the equator of the ball. And then we'll look at the kind of southern hemisphere here in a second. So I'm going to keep doing this. And so this is literally just a series of darts that wrap around the body. And with any luck, I'm going to start to get some consistency here on my dart lengths. So that's the goal. Obviously, yours will look a little different than mine because you have smaller balls. So my darts might be a little smaller than yours because you have more paper to take up for each of these darts. Or you might have more darts spread out more frequently. So you can see here that we're starting to shape the paper around the ball. And in effect, this is kind of what draping is like. So in patternmaking, you draft patterns that are flat. You use a ruler, draw out measurements, so on and so forth. But in the draping technique, you actually put the two-dimensional object, or whatever we're going for here, on the 3D surface and kind of shape it to the 3D surface. So this is actually, draping, so don't tear it. Just trying to pull out and make it straight, but I tore it. Okay. Okay, so I finished shaping the pattern paper around the ball, and you can see, for our first kind of iteration of this, it fits pretty well around the top. I did have a little issue here, but I'm not going to tape it down because I want to be able to lay it back out flat. But now what I'm going to do is we're just going to create pattern for half of this ball right here. So I'm going to take with my marker or pencil or whatnot and draw, you know, essentially like a hemline. So we could think of this as a hem if we want. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to do like a wavy line. You could do a straight line if you wanted. But the trick is I'm going to make sure it is well above the edge of the paper that I've got here. So maybe we can work on connecting it to my existing line. Something like that. If it's hard to draw, like it kind of was here, that means that I need to take up more paper in my dart. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and trim away the excess, still keeping everything. Actually, before I trim away, I'm going to mark all my darts, okay? So before you trim, go ahead and we're going to work on marking all of the darts so we can figure out how this thing goes back together. All right, to mark the dart, we need to make sure that we transfer we need to mark a straight line on the paper that's underneath and the folded edge of the dart. So darts usually look something like this. Let's see if I can get it to focus. And so I've marked on the paper underneath and I've also marked on the folded edge. So I need to do that for every single one of these. So it's essentially like two straight lines. And when I fold them, I'm going to match those lines. And that's how I know how these darts go back together. So these are called notches in pattern making. And notches are literally guidelines that when you match them back up, they should fit how you intended, how it was draped. Okay, and then the other mark that I'm going to make before we take the ball out of here is I'm going to go ahead and mark the points at which all of those darts terminate. So my ball's trying to creep out. And so basically it's the point of all these triangles here. So I'm just going to press down and I'm going to do just a dot for each area where these triangles terminate. And so that's called your dart point. And that's where how long the dart should be when it's folded, if it is to go back and kind of fit accurately. So just make sure your ball doesn't creep out of there. This guy's kind of shorter, is where he started, so I'm going to put his point back somewhere over there. Okay, so now I can cut the excess of this off, and I'm going to cut it off at the black line that I've drawn here. And cut through all the layers of the paper. So there's folds back there, so just make sure you cut through all the fold. This essentially would be your style lines, okay, for your bags, or thinking kind of more broadly, bigger picture, you know, garment-based prototypes. So I'm just making sure that every time that I'm catching the fold underneath, almost there. Okay, so I'm going to discard this bottom part. That's trash for us. And so now, when I take this off of here, you know, I can start to see where things fold in order to get back to the cylindrical shape. So at this point, if you've got any tape in the way, now would be the time to go ahead and undo the tape. And of course, carefully so you don't rip your tissue paper. So I might actually just take and snip my tape, and so I can kind of undo it. So peel the tape if you can. I don't know if I can peel. So essentially what just happened here, what you saw, is when it was taped together, it looked like this, but when I undid, that's the dart. And since it's folded nicely and everything, it has what it should look like when it's all folded back together in order to maintain the curve of the line. So yeah, that's part of dart. So you can see this one over here, it wasn't taped. This one is taped. Let me undo this one. And I have marks on both sides of the line. That one's kind of, there we go. This one's already undone. This one's almost there. I'm gonna undo it. Okay. And one more. Okay, so I can take my pattern piece now, and this is why I didn't tape that piece where I pulled it apart. Just, yeah, I could tape it now, actually. And this is what my pattern piece would look like in order to replicate that shape around that ball. So the other thing that I want to do before I lose all the information is I'm going to actually connect all these dots. So I'm going to draw in here lines that go from my notch down here, the corresponding notch, and the point. So just pay attention when you do this so you get them all on the right places, and you don't accidentally connect the wrong notch to the point. And the way that you can see that, I'm going to find a different marker here. The way that you can see that is because one of your dart legs is folded, right? So we have creases in the paper. So this is a good one right here. This crease right here is my kind of left dart leg. This fold in the center line is the center of it. So I know that this one that has no fold kind of goes with like this kind of set of three. So we have a left notch, we have a center line, and we have a right notch, and that together is kind of the three parts that we need in order to draw our dart legs. And this is the pattern making process. So in kind of doing this activity one time, we in effect are kind of very quickly learning the basics of pattern making, which is my intent. So go ahead and draw in all of your lines. Now, if I were to do this again as like a second iteration, I would definitely try to have some more consistency in the length of my darts. So some of them are kind of short and squatty, and some of them are long and slender. And so I would definitely, want some consistency around that. 2 dots there, so I'm just going to choose which one I think is it. Okay, so now I have the very kind of basic pattern shape for the drape that I did on the ball. So if we were to put this all back together, like literally if I were to take and fold all of these darts, fold it together, terminate at the dart point so don't go beyond it, maybe tape it all back together, it would fit exactly onto this ball shape one more time. Okay, so now we're going to finish up this pattern pretty quickly. And what we need is basically some larger paper. So there was tabloid size paper that came with your kit also that I gave for you guys. And what we need to do is we need to put some marks on here, and we need to put some seam allowance on here. So it just barely doesn't fit. So at this point, what you can do is you could trace this shape all the way around here so you have a nice clean submission. Or in my case, I'm going to save a little bit of time, and I'm just going to tape these down to the piece of paper behind us. So without the seam allowance, we have what's called blocks. So pattern blocks are garment patterns that are just a basic shape that have no seam allowance. Once we add the seam allowance on, we have what's known as like a sewing pattern, or it has various other names. So without seam allowance, it's a block. There's no seam allowances on blocks. Once we add the seam allowance, then we know it's ready for to be sewn together for production. So I need to go get another piece of tabloid size paper. So while you're taping, I'm going to go ahead and get that. Okay, I'm just going to tape this on behind so I have a little bit of overlap so I can get the rest of my ball pattern on here. So I'll tape it together on this side. Finish taping around the edges. So I mean, I know this is kind of abstract because it's a ball, but at the end of the day, this could be a hat, you know, this could be going over, scaled up or down, going over like other mounds of the body. All right, so now there's going to be some marks that we're going to put on here. And so we need to make an assessment about grain line, right? When we're working in these balls, it doesn't really matter for where we put the grain. However, if we were working with patterns on the body, the grain line would always be parallel to the center front. So if I bring back these pattern pieces, grain line would always be parallel to the center front, and that's so it is nice and square and doesn't have any balance or fit issues that you read about in your readings. So I'm going to go ahead and just essentially square a line down the center of my pattern. Let's see if I can. Okay. Grain line is usually noted with a double-ended arrow. And then the other thing that I need to do is I'm going to go ahead and do two things. I'm going to put a 1/4 inch seam allowance on this, so 1/4 inch all the way around the edges of the pattern. And then the second thing I'm going to do is transfer my notches to the edge of the pattern. So right now my notches appear on the edge of the paper, right? But once we add a 1/4 inch seam allowance or 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch or 3/4 is usually what's used in production, but we're at a smaller scale, so we'll use a 1/4 inch. And then for the purposes of this exercise, the only other markings that we need before you turn this in is your name. So, and then go ahead and date it for me. So, okay. So everyone will have a unique pattern shape because their lines will be slightly different. I'm going to work on adding my seam allowance all the way around the edges, and to do that I just use a see-through ruler, so hopefully you have something equivalent here. And because they're mostly curved, I'll use a series of dashed lines, but once there is a straight line, I'll use my ruler to make a straight line. So in this case, the dark point right here is straight. I'll get back into curved lines. And this seam allowance right here, the last step of this will be to cut out this pattern, so it doesn't matter that they're not solid lines that I'm working with right now, because I'll cut it out here in a minute. Alright, so I finished adding seam allowance and cutting the pattern out. So now, like I said before, I need to make sure I transfer all of my notches to the edge of my pattern nicely and cleanly, so I can see them, and I'll show you why here in a second. So I'm literally just retracing those T-shaped marks where the dart lines extend to the edge of the pattern, because now we added a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, and then I think what I'm going to do to clean up this pattern, what I typically do is I'm going to use a straight pin or some kind of like a, the sharp edge of the scissor or whatever, and I'm going to poke a hole into each of my dart points, and I'll show you here in a second, because in this way I will actually be able to remove the tissue paper, my first iteration of patterns, and kind of clean this up. And yeah, I'll have to redo my marks here, but that'll be okay. Okay, so I think I got all of them. I can count them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I must have counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, I got them all. I don't have any extras. And so at this point, what you could do to kind of clean this all up, and what I typically do with my patterns, is I actually peel this first top layer off. So I am going to lose some of my marks, but this is what you end up seeing in more finished patterns, is only the dart leg, so the notches at the edge of the pattern, and I'll circle the dart points, which are the holes that I just poked in paper. Final patterns, when they're done by hand, are done in like a cardstock called oak tag, and so they're really thick and durable, so they can be reused over and over again. Obviously there's an issue with the tissue paper being too light and flimsy. Okay, I'm just gonna see, still had some tape, so make sure all my notches are there. Okay, and now I'm gonna find all of the holes that I poked, and I'm gonna circle them. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm gonna redraw in my grain line since it bled through anyway. So patterns always have grain lines, always. They always have some kind of internal marks like notches or drill holes. These are called drill holes for the darts. I'm gonna rewrite my name. The date. And make a note that it has a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And this is one pattern piece of one. One of one. I'm going to circle back to the Clementines here for a second. So these are the traces of the skins here. So whether we do it in tissue paper or it's the skin or whatnot, I literally traced it, added our seam allowance. In here, I put that it's for the Clementine. So this one I might put ball pattern. For Clementine, it's piece 1 of 2 and 2 of 2 because I have 2 pattern pieces that fit together to make the rest of the shape, the spherical shape. Okay, and then I also label this as like the top piece and the bottom piece. Initial date. Okay, so for your final project, you will be making paper patterns. You'll probably have an initial paper pattern, and then you'll have the second iteration of the paper pattern. If I were to take this paper pattern and redo all of my folds, this paper pattern would fit back onto the ball shape. So if you want to try it, you can, I use a ruler sometimes I can see it from the back side, crease it, fold it, pop the paper. You usually have to, when you're working more rigid substrates like paper, you have to pop it because it's trying to make the three-dimensional shape, right? Fold it all back together, and that dart intake should be somewhat nice and folded up onto the inside of it too. It shouldn't hang out any weird or look weird along this edge here. So I'm going to fold this all back together, and then I will show you what it looks like when I'm done. Okay, so it took me a minute, but I got the paper pattern folded. The more rigid the paper is, the harder it is to fold, so that's why we work in tissue paper. But obviously if we had a better drape of the material, it would lay a whole lot nicer. But it does, in fact, you know, go back to the original shape that we wanted. So to submit this, what you'll do is, I think go ahead and take a picture of your initial pattern shape here, and then you do not need to fold this, but you could if you're curious. Obviously it's a good proof of concept. So I want pictures of both your initial patterns with like the dart legs drawn in, so it should look like this, and then a picture of your final pattern piece here. That would be, we would be able to trace this off into fabric and sew up all those darts and make a pattern for it. So this is what your submission will look like, or your unique shape, of course, for this online assignment.